Right, well my name's Chris Norris and my wife and I live up just out of Hampton at a small place called Grapetree. We've bought 20 acres 6 years ago with the intention of moving up from Brisbane, which we did 4 years ago. At the time we were both just recently semi-retired. We have a lovely piece of paradise here. I grew up living on farms in the central North Island of New Zealand and managed to have a lot of outdoor experiences that a lot of people would never have. Bushfire in New Zealand is quite out of the ordinary, and it's something that we've had to get to grips with. Having bought this property, try and understand ways of minimising risk and really just making sure that if we're ever impacted by bushfire that we're going to come out the other side with as little impact as possible. We bought the property because we wanted a lifestyle block. Once we saw this place, we knew it was the right place for us. All along this escarpment at Grapetree, this is by far one of the smallest properties here at 20 acres. Our neighbours, most of them are 90 acres plus. Predominantly lifestyle, but obviously on a block that size you're looking at having to manage stock or have some form of vegetation control. On the other side of us we've got a privately run pine forest on the western side of our property. Further to the east there's more small farms, 100 to 200 acres, and then they're bounded by the Ravensbourne National Park. Our property would be 3 to 4 k's from the Ravensbourne National Park to the east. In 2019 the climate was very dry. Bushfire was something that was being talked about, the possibility of bushfire, and sure enough it did happen. We had a bushfire that was started on a neighbouring property to the southwest of us, an absentee owner, and that's where the bushfire started. The Pechey Grapetree bushfire started. With various wind changes and things, it made its way down to the Ravensbourne National Park and severely damaged our property and some of our neighbouring properties. The fire came from the southwest. It jumped the containment line that was in place into the pine forest and ran away down the roadside verge to the east. Our property was totally burnt apart from our house and our shed, which were saved. The trees behind me, they were all blackened and burnt right to the top of the knoll that you can see on the other side of the valley. It was pretty devastating to see the impact of fire, having never really experienced it before. The fire that burnt a significant portion of our neighbouring property and their neighbours as well. That was heading towards Crow's Nest, but that fire was contained by work with the water bombing and the rural fireys that were in place. They managed to hold it from going too much further. When the fire approached from the southwest, it was mid-afternoon. It had jumped the containment lines that the command centre next door had in place, and it came roaring down. It was a 30 metre, 40 metre wall of flame. I've never seen or experienced anything like it in my life. The sound was deafening. I was quite determined to stay with the property and make sure that I could do my best to save the house, but I soon changed my mind. My wife and I took off. The fire would have been 80 metres, 100 metres from our house. When we left the property, when we left the house, I was of the feeling, or we both were, that we'd never see, the house was gone. Because of our experience with local rural fire brigade, we had an evacuation plan in place. Between us we knew exactly where we were going and how we were going to exit the property. Basically we managed to get out the driveway just in time. If we'd stayed another 10 minutes it would have been a different story altogether. As we were leaving, a rural fire team were coming down the driveway with a grader and a small fire truck, and they managed to grade a containment line directly around the house, which was a grader width wide. We travelled out of the property, driving our vehicles made our way down Grapetree Road to the north, and we stood and watched the fire coming down to the house. The sight of watching the fire approach our house was devastating. We lost sight of it after a while with a massive amount of smoke. I've never seen a firewall that big in my life. It was just a wall of flame coming down that from the southwest. Absolutely terrifying. Once we'd seen what was happening and realised there was nothing more to do, we headed back onto the New England Highway and drove into Hampton, where we stayed the night with some friends. Later that night we got a call from one of our neighbours who's in the RFS, and he informed us that the house and the shed was safe. That was a massive relief. He'd actually stayed and put out spot fires along our boundary to prevent it from going into the neighbour's property. Yeah, there's a number of reasons that I felt our house was safe. When we bought the property, we realised that we were buying into an area that was prone to bushfire, which was obvious with the amount of undergrowth and vegetation that was in the area. So we put a lot of time and effort into preparing the property even prior to building. We cleared a lot of the lantana, made sure that where the house was being built had a good clearance around it. We also understood the necessity to build a home that could withstand a bushfire. One of the requirements that we had when we commenced building was we had to build to a bushfire attack level of 12.5, which is quite a low level, but it meant that we could only use certain materials for the cladding and things like the stainless steel screens on the windows. We had steel gutter guard around the whole home, which did make a huge difference. There's no flammable materials in the building other than the timber framing. Once we started building, I put a lot of time into thinking about if there was a fire, where it's going to come from. We managed the property in such a way that we still had blocks of native bush and clear areas that acted as fire breaks. We kept all our fence lines clear and made sure that if we needed to, we could get access with the right equipment to manage fire if and when it came. On our block, we made a decision from day one that we didn't want the responsibility of livestock. The infrastructure on the property reflects that. We have a lot of grassed area, which I manage by slashing and mowing. I'm planting a lot of native trees I enjoy, and also provide habitat for a lot of wildlife. The main wildlife we see are wallabies, of course, and we have quite a vast array of bird life, everything from the glossy black cockatoos to the yellow-tailed cockatoos through down to the little wrens that we see in the native thicket that we're cultivating up there. We don't see very many koalas here. What hopefully we will notice in the future is, as a result of planting a lot of koala food trees, that they will start to come. They are present in the neighbourhood. We do hear them and see the odd one, but I think that once we get established vegetation here from the work I'm doing on replanting, we will start to see a few more of those. The lantana, that's a long story. We have a challenge with the lantana. When we purchased the property, the lantana across the property was 15 to 20 feet. That was controlled by mulching. One of the blessings with the fire was that it wiped out most of the lantana. And what I've noticed now is that we can control it by either spot spraying or slashing or just grubbing the lantana as it comes through. After the bushfire, most of the property apart from the house site and around the shed was scorched. It was black, covered in a white ash. The heat obviously was phenomenal. The bushfire virtually decimated the lantana, although it's a pretty resilient plant. There is a certain amount of regrowth coming through now that we've had some decent rain. You just have to be on top of it. If you don't, it'll take over again. After the fire, there was a lot of native regrowth, and that happened across the property. The kikuyu, the very resilient grass, and that virtually came back into life after the first rain. We've lost a number of large gum trees. A couple of months ago at Perseverance Hall, there was a local workshop on managing my property specifically. I gathered a lot of useful information. We had aerial mapping, and that allowed us to look at the property from a perspective of where fire may come from and how to best manage our property. In terms of vegetation types, what I've done is I'm replanting a lot of native trees here, and we're blocking it, creating habitat for wildlife. At the same time, it's a bit of a juggling act because I need to make sure that if we do get another bushfire challenge, that those areas that I've put work into remain, or try and manage that risk of fire getting to them.